So, welcome back, and as you can see, I'm not in the shed just at the moment, but I thought I'd do a quick introduction to this video. It's a video which is in several parts. Starting off, looking at a problem we had with derailments. Had a bit of track that's rising from the terminal station at about 1 in 40, so that's quite steep, and at the top of that it goes onto a level board, and at exactly the same place it's starting a curve, quite a sharp curve, about 22 inch radius, and with heat and stuff in the shed, the two rails had moved, and sometimes the inner rail was somewhat lower than the outer rail, and sometimes vice versa, which meant that if you took a coach with its sort of 10-inch wheelbase over that transition, the vertical, the curve and the twists, one of the coaches particularly was regularly derailing, so needed to strip down and try and find out the cause and rectify it by relaying. So the first bit's going to be a little bit about how I tackled the problem.
Since the ballast is stuck down with PVA, a little bit of wetting and then a gentle prodding will get the ballast up, and it actually comes up very easily once it has soaked a little bit. So with most of the ballast removed, discovered part of the problem was the track was held down with some track pins which were actually exacerbating the hump. So with those out, actually the track now floats a little bit better. It's not quite sitting down onto the underlay, and we're going to have to pack it out a bit to make it rigid and then reballast. Having got the track secured and run a few trains over it to make sure that everything works, now starting to reballast, but I'm doing it in very short sections, letting each section dry, making sure the track is still stable, making sure that the trains run over without derailment before moving on and doing the next bit. So it's a bit of caution here after the previous problems. So I've been having some problems with trains coming up this hill. Unfortunately, the vertical curve at the top, where it goes from steep up to level, combined with the curve coming round, and the fact that as the track heated up and cooled down in the different temperatures and the two rails moved relative to each other, meant that particularly some of the carriages were often derailing in this sort of area. I think I put it down to the fact that the carriage is quite long, and with the changing gradient it meant that the bogies couldn't flex enough either end, and they were trying to turn at the same time, and sometimes they were getting a twist between the two ends from the rails. So took up all of this bit of track, reprofiled it, tested it stage by stage, putting it back, and now the ballast is back, so it's time to see what will happen if we run a passenger train up the hill. So let's see what happens. So the Class 37 with 4 Mark 1 coaches, just leaving the station and just beginning to come up the hill. Let's hope that it gets round without derailing. So that's a result, and now let's see what happens with the Class 20 and some merry-go-round style wagons. So Class 20 is just starting off, coming up at some speed. And those wagons had been causing me some problems all around the layout, but I think now, having gone to some pivoting couplings, we might have solved that. So after having had some problems with derailments on the curve coming up beside me, and sorting that out, I thought it was a good time just to take stock of the railway and think about what to do next. For those of you who've watched the various videos, and they're nothing like as good as many of the railway videos, particularly Charlie's from Chadwick or New Junction or many of the others that I've enjoyed watching, you'll know that I've had some challenges on the way and also had some successes. If I go right way back, the whole idea of building a railway was started when I was about going from full-time work to part-time and thought I need a hobby. So decided that I would build a model railway and ordered a shed, the shed that I'm standing in now. However, no sooner had the order been placed than Boris got on the TV and told us that we were into a lockdown. So being at home all the time, not a lot to do. And of course, at that point, no shed, although I was still building the foundations for it, and so could carry on with a bit. Luckily, the supplier of the shed, their construction team, were quite quickly allocated as being part of the building trade. And if you remember, the building trade can continue. So one day, two guys arrived with a lorry and a shed. And by the time they left in the afternoon, we had the building I'm in now. Luckily, places like Screwfix were still available. Other retailers are, of course, available. So I was able to get all the electrical kit, B&Q for the wood, and over a few weeks managed to fit out the basic structure, lights, power, etc. One thing I did get wrong, and I think anybody who is going to use a wooden shed as a railway room needs to think about this, is insulation. I had assumed that the wooden planks, because it's a sort of log cabin style, would be a reasonable insulation in their own right, but found out that they're not. So really, I should have put some insulation on the walls. However, of course, that would have taken a few centimetres off the walls all the way around, and space, even in quite a large shed such as this one, is at a premium. I should really also put the insulation into the roof before starting to build, because cutting up insulation panels, sticking them in the roof and securing them in place, not the easiest when you're climbing over parts of a railway. And of course, a few have come down because I didn't fix them very well, and that has made a bit of a mess at times. So another little learning point. One of the interesting things about model railways is designing the layout, and I spent quite a long time with AnyRail, the free version, using that to design my layout and trying to make as complex a layout as possible in the space available. And you would think that if you have a shed that's 3.5, 4 meters square, roughly, that you'd have plenty of room to build a model railway at 00 gauge. But it is surprising, by the time you get some reasonable radius curves, and mine are really too tight, could have been better if they'd been a little bit more expansive. Made some space for stations, for sidings, for anything like a reasonable length train, then yeah, the space disappears very quickly. However, what I did try and do was to make the railway quite interesting to operate, and in hindsight, which is always a wonderful thing, some bits have worked really well, and some bits I would, if I was doing it again, do it differently. And that's actually part of where I am at the moment. Is the question is what I've got going to stay? Do I just finish off the scenery, and there are some places around where the work is needed just to finish it off? Or is it actually time to do a little bit of remodelling to make the railway more flexible and to overcome some of the problems I've had with it? You might want to think about giving me some comments on what you suggest I would do. So I'm just going to show you around the railway now and talk about some of the things that have worked and some of the things that haven't. So the main station is probably one of the things that has almost worked. I wanted to have a terminal station, give a bit of interest. It also made a potential of running slightly longer trains possible, because if you had a through station, then you've got to have track beyond it. And this station occupies a board. The two boards together, including the junctions at the end of the station, are a standard 8-foot sheet of plywood in length. So that gives you an idea of the sort of size we're talking about. The platforms are long enough to hold a locomotive and 3 coaches, or if there's no locomotive on the buffer stops, you can get 4 coaches in, although the rest of the layout would struggle to handle a 4-coach train. And that actually is one of the disappointing bits, that the trains are so short. The freight trains that you can see here are really just me putting together wagons, because I've been testing following the derailment problems, and they're too long really for the layout. So that's another learning point. Think about your layout, how it's going to operate, and particularly if you're going to have a goods yard such as I've got here, with access to a turntable where you could then get access to some loco lines, then think about how the trains are going to move around, where your shunter's going to be, how the brake van's going to be stored, things like that. And again, hindsight, I think the turntable was a luxury. It would have probably been better to build some more sidings in this area around to the right, and better head shunt type facilities. The turntable is a little bit of a waste. It looks nice, but yeah, it perhaps, particularly in a diesel era, is a little bit of an anathema. So the sidings we've got, I've had to extend one of them where the Class 08 is. That used to go just as far as the goods shed, but it became apparent that there just wasn't room to marshal a reasonable length train and be able to depart it, so hence extended that track. 4 platforms in the station. Again, perhaps I could have got away with 3 platforms and had a little bit more space for the freight facilities. Would have been able to get the head shunt a little bit further to the right in terms of connection. We'll just get a bit more flexibility. But overall, with the terminal station and the scenery, as you can see, there are a few bits where I have got to finish it off, but generally reasonably happy with that. It's gone reasonably well. The back scenes have worked, the foliage, everything. A couple of scratch build station buildings down the far end. Could do with a little bit of finishing off. Some station canopies needed, some lights perhaps. Again, these sort of things you think of after the event. Now, one of the things that I wanted to do was to have some different levels. I wanted trains to be able to run continually around the layout, even though I had got a terminal station. So I built a lower level underneath the terminal station, and that has caused me a little bit of a problem. It is deliberately designed to just about give the amount of height needed for the trains. As you can see, it's quite cramped, and there are of course all the wires from the layout above hanging down. Another lesson there is to tidy up as you go along, make sure that things are secured. I built the boards with the all the wiring with the boards on their side, and of course then when you put them down, everything droops. So thinking about that for next time. Also the fact, trying to get this double track loop on the end here, trying to get that in and without having to have too far to reach across to get to trains in the platforms, meant that the radius of those curves is a little bit tight. And in fact, that's one of my derailment problems, is at the back there is a small reverse curve, and that seems to be a problem for one of the coaches, but only one. My original AnyRail design was for this to be a single track reversing loop. I wish I'd done that now. The double track looks nice, but it has introduced that extra little bit of complexity, the need to have the wiggle, the reverse curve. So the whole thing has just got a little bit more complicated. And of course, I've got a double junction hidden underneath. And so if anything goes wrong with that, it is a pain to access it. So that's a learning point, and ideally would have had a little bit more height so that one could get in and do things, and that's something to think about. So one option is to look at removing the terminal station boards and getting in there, perhaps remodeling this lower level, or even, as we'll talk about in a minute, making the terminal station a little bit higher so there is more room to get in to do things. Now, going completely to the other end of the railway, the scenic board is one I'm very pleased with. We've got a canal in the middle, which I think has worked really well, with a lock underneath a railway bridge, a little boat, and of course, as you get with all canals, there is a pub beside the canal, and people enjoying a bit of refreshment in the sunshine. So that has worked well. A lot of interesting learning from watching various videos just about how to make things, how to actually create things like the metal piling around the side of the canal, how to make a water look in it. A few things, again, hindsight, could have done a little bit better. If you look carefully, there is actually a crack or a joint in the wood, and that does show up, unfortunately. However, the combination of loops seems to work. We've got the opportunity of having a train going around the far side and down through the tunnel here and back, meaning that at the lower level you can have a train going round and round and round, or it can come up through the double track up to the higher level over the bridges. And I'm quite pleased with those bridges. The bridge here was scratch built. Doesn't look too bad at all, although could have been a bit more sturdy. Another learning point. The bowstring bridge was a kit, and I think that looks really nice, and it works really well. The bridge coming round was using panels. Can't remember whose panels they were, but they're standard ones for the actual girders, and thin ply as the bridge base. That's worked well. However, one thing you will see if you look carefully is we have got some insulated joints on the curve, and they've been a bit of a pain there because effectively you've got a sort of reversing feature here. Polarities need to change, and that need to put the joints somewhere, and ideally I should have put them right the way up at a straight section of track. Anyway, you live and learn, don't you? But this scenic board has worked pretty well. So the middle station, a little passing station with a little freight facility, small cattle dock, probably no longer in use, although we have got a couple of cows in there, and signal box and a few sidings. And this again shows the problem of space. Even though I've pushed the curves at one end right the way out to the wall, and they sweep around with long platforms as long as I could get, and a curve round by the windmill, again as almost as close to the wall as I can get, by the time you actually look at the station itself, it's surprising how little room there is. If you need to make a run-round road for freight trains clear of the main line, then by the time you've done that, you actually, even using double slips, end up with very little room for sidings, and each siding probably only holds 2 or 3 wagons. Now it sort of works, but it would have been nice if there had been more space. So that's one thing to think about, is not just how to build your railway, but also how it is going to operate. And now this is one of my mistakes, and at the lower level, put the lights on, The lower level, there are 6 tracks. The 6 tracks were designed to be able to hold trains, which could then appear from a hidden area and join the train service, perhaps going up to the terminus or just going round on the lower level. However, when I was laying these out, at the right-hand end, I got it right. All the tracks converged together to feed out 2 tracks coming out underneath the viaduct and then splitting to go either around the scenic area or up to the higher level. But at the left-hand end of the board, I tried to be too clever and so arranged the layout so that trains could arrive coming down embankments from the terminal station and into the fiddle area, or could be running underneath and down underneath the terminal station. In reality, I very rarely run trains up or down these tracks here at either side. I have done it a few times, but it's more interesting for a train to run over the top. So with hindsight, I should have altered the layout. As you can see, if we look at the diagram, the lines coming from the terminus are the outer 2, and they feed all 3 in each direction of the storage lines, but the lines which are going underneath the terminus only feed the middle ones. And so the outer 2 hardly get any use. One thing to think about is whether I might redesign it to make the crossovers go the other way, so that the lines underneath the terminus feed all 3 sidings, and these outer connections from the terminus just feed 1 siding each. That's one to have a think about. However, to do that, I'm going to have to take up this middle board and then get in and remodel the layout. But it might well be worth doing it because, as you can probably see, I've got a point tucked in here which is on the start of the slope on a curve with a board join right where the motor wants to go. So the other area I'm thinking about is actually, do I want to keep these connections that go from the terminus down to the fiddle sidings or storage sidings? If they weren't there, then it would make my vertical geometry much better. At the moment, you've got tracks coming up from underneath the terminus, as you can see at the back there. They're rising up before going round to the storage sidings. We then got tracks that are going back from the storage sidings up to the terminus level, and then we've got tracks from the terminus which are going up to get to the middle station level. And the problem I've been having is in this climb with a curve at the end, and that's where the derailments have been happening. So one option is to cut these 2 tracks out, one either side, to raise the terminus up by perhaps 6-7 centimeters, something like that, and then make the line from the terminus round to the middle station flat, which would make it a lot easier to get the track running reliably. So it would be a bit of work, but it might be worth it, particularly coupled with altering the arrangement for the storage sidings. So that's just my thoughts. I don't know, perhaps in the comments you'd like to make some suggestions as to what I might do and how we might make the railway work better. So you probably need to see some trains running, so I'll get a couple of trains out, we'll run them round, film that, and then that'll be the end of this little video.